Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about my general personal preference for hip hinges as far as rep ranges and exercise selections go. And this is something that I obviously personally do in all my training vlogs, because you guys know that outside of these normal informative videos, I vlog all of my workouts every week. The entire training session with detailed descriptions are given on all four of my major workouts every week. So people who follow my channel are familiar with that. You guys see the failures, everything else. So over to the point, and this is what I do with my clients as well. I don't program generally anything more than singles on any form of deadlift, and a deadlift is a pull from the floor. Now, I think it's important that everyone deadlift, and when I say deadlift, that doesn't mean always just a classical, traditional, conventional deadlift. We might have to vary ranges of motion. We're going to vary stances, barbells, things like that. Different variations of the deadlift are important. Doesn't mean when I say the deadlift, I don't mean the deadlift. So I'm talking about deadlifting. Everyone should be deadlifting. And that's going to vary a lot. But usually for most of the rep work, unless people are doing a Romanian deadlift, which is a hip hinge, but it's not a deadlift. So that can be a misconception when I say that, because some of my clients do a Romanian deadlift. People might think that, well, that's a deadlift, so you're not being consistent. But I am, because it's a deadlift in name only. I think the best way to describe it would be a hip hinge while holding the barbell in your hands. Right? Romanian deadlift is not a deadlift. So I prefer to have everyone do their rep work or their volume with good mornings, and there's a number of reasons for this. Now, before people say, well, what about exercise variation? Well, there's different forms of good mornings, right? There's different forms of good mornings. You guys will see me even displaying here different barbells, bands, chains, stances. These things matter a lot. But generally speaking, if people are dealing with just normal barbell deadlifts of different types, we can do the same thing with good mornings, right? And we can even turn the good mornings into an explosive movement out of the bottom, can't we? People would say, what? Yeah, couldn't we just set pins to where we come down and we stop on the pins and then explode up? We can do good mornings in the same manner. We can turn them into an explosive bottom position movement. It has just as much variation as we have by running 10 different forms of deadlifts. We can do 10 different forms of good mornings. People say, well, what's the difference? We're not having to hold the weight in our hands. Right, there's a recovery difference. We're also not exploding from a dead stop off the floor. In other words, if our goal is purely to induce hypertrophy through fatigue and get things like a stretch reflex, good mornings are better suited for that role. They're better suited for that role. And I've basically reached a point, both in my own training and with my clients, to where I have everyone do good mornings. Everyone does good mornings. All of my clients do good mornings. All of my clients box squat. All my clients do sumo deadlifts. Doesn't mean that's all they do, but they do all these things. So when we start looking at it, and you look at what these exercises are suited for, the deadlift, because of the nature of it, because number one, it's a relatively difficult exercise to recover from, and because of the nature of having to explode off the floor, it lends itself better to things like maximum strength. It lends itself better to things like speed strength. So if we're going to do maximum strength and we're pulling heavy singles, and people need to remember that concept. Doing triples is not maximum strength. Like, there's nothing more annoying for me as both a strength athlete and a coach when I see someone talk about a maximum strength or power program, and they'll throw this in. The bodybuilders love to do this stuff. They'll call it hybrid type training, and they'll do 3s or 5s. Like that's not maximum strength. That's not maximum strength. That is not heavy. To develop maximum strength, you have to go above 90% of your 1 rep max. You're not doing 3s and 5s with that. All right? It needs to be made clear. Heavy singles are maximum strength. And no, that's not relative. because you use the word maximum. So over to the point. Deadlifts lend themselves very, very well to that. And I mean all forms of deadlifts. They also lend themselves very well to explosive training. Now, some people argue, I don't think the deadlift is an explosive movement. Well, nobody asked you. Maybe you don't know what you're doing. Okay? People who state that clearly don't understand the broad spectrum of training or the different applications of the deadlift to make such an absurd statement. Deadlifts lend themselves very, very well to dynamic effort and compensatory acceleration type training, particularly when we start manipulating them with contrast weight and bands and things. In fact, I think a fair argument can be made that speed pulls done with these implements exceed what you would get from things like cleans and snatches. I think they're superior. Says me. Good mornings, on the other hand, are somewhat easy to recover from. Due to their nature, they're very difficult to do with maximum strength. And it's not to say that people don't do it, but even the people who have promoted that over the years have come back and said, yeah, we really shouldn't be doing heavy singles with them. Right? Even the West Side guys have said that. They're like, well, do heavy triples, that's fine. If you're going to do them as a max effort exercise, which is not really max effort. It's still very heavy. You guys get the idea. All right? Basically, it's loading a hip hinge through something that's not quite a deadlift. But when we start thinking in terms of the relative movement patterns, if you look at the different stances and bars and things involved, we basically can hit all the same muscles with the same degree of exertion, all the muscles barring maybe the traps, maybe the grip, the arms, but we also don't deal with the issues with the shoulder capsules. But we are working everything else. We can get different variations of the good morning to where we can hit different parts of the posterior chain and different ratios to the lumbar, the T-spine, the lats. All right? We can get all these things. But because of the nature of it, and because of the propensity to get a stretch reflex or a myotatic reflex, right, such as here. So watch it when I'm doing these for a full range of motion with the safety bar and the stance. If you notice the muscles being involved, other than, again, maybe the traps and anything involving the shoulder and the forearms and biceps, I'm hitting all the same muscles you'd get on a deadlift, almost same as a sumo deadlift, very similar. But we can do relatively large volumes of training. Now, the interesting point here, people would say, well, what do you mean easier on recovery? Well, we can hit all those muscles with a lighter weight. In other words, we can get the same rate of perceived exertion with a lighter weight. Because I'm sitting there with a safety bar up on my back with 205. That 205, 4 reps, probably pretty similar to what I could do with 405 on a barbell, right? Barring the hook grip, if I were to go over to a mixed grip, I could probably crank out sets of 10 with 405 for about the same rate of perceived exertion that I'm getting with 205 on the safety bar for the similar muscles. We're dealing with basically 50% of the axial loading for the same amount of reps. And instead of a dead stop, we're getting a stretch reflex. So if we're talking about just general hypertrophy and building all this musculature up, we can handle much, much, much larger volumes of good mornings with a heavier focus on things like the spinal erectors, because arguably these work the erectors harder than the deadlifts, particularly more than the sumo deadlift. And actually the data tends to show that erectors, spinal erectors, don't get hit as hard on any of the power lifts as people think they do. They really don't. Get pretty hard on this. So this allows us to do much larger volumes of training on a hip hinge for hypertrophy purposes. Now, is it as good for developing maximum strength? Absolutely not. Is it good for developing speed strength? Absolutely not. But for creating metabolic fatigue, it's a superior tool. So what I'm suggesting here is that depending upon what your specific goal is for an exercise selection, these two different exercises lend themselves to opposite ends of the rep range spectrum. In other words, pick the correct tool for the job. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.